Redditors who've unexpectedly found dead bodies. How did it happen? Does it still affect you? As a stoned teenager camping on the riverbank, a body washed up right next to us. LSD or not, we notified the police. Turned out to be a rafting accident. That's basically the worst thing I can imagine happening to me during an LSD trip. My friend worked housekeeping at a cheap motel in a small mountain town a few years back. We had plans to party later that day, and her boss was really chill, so I went into work with her that day to help her get her rooms cleaned faster. We come up on a room that should have been vacated an hour prior. Of course, before you enter any room you have to knock and say housekeeping. We were both knocking on each door and saying this in unison, so there was no way someone wouldn't hear. Anyways, we enter the room and see a guy still in the bed. It looks like he's passed out, but we notice the nightstand has multiple RX and liquor bottles on it. We both noped out quickly, and before we put 2 and 2 together I laughed and said, God, we were so loud. No way he didn't hear us. Dude is probably dead. My friend's face just dropped and she took off to the office. Yeah, dude was dead. There was a suicide note and everything. I felt like a huge dong for joking around about it. Also, that was the first and last day I have ever done motel housekeeping. So, yeah. My brother was walking his dog one morning and ended up finding someone's severed head in a bag. He reported it to the police and they confirmed it was indeed a real human head. His Facebook post half an hour later was, "So me and boss, his dog, found a severed head near the Hollywood sign. We're probably gonna go hunting for the body later." A guy I knew found a dead kid when renovating a farmhouse that used to be abandoned for a client. Turns out his weird parents couldn't part with him, so they put him in a chair in a closet in the barn. He was dressed, had long dried food around him and used coloring books and toys. He just mummified. He was pretty fricked up from the ordeal and got wasted one night to the point where his neighbor had to drive him to the ER. I think he's fine now but won't talk about it often. Another guy I knew was a forest ranger. He was hiking and found a skeleton. After a huge investigation they discovered his hillbilly family buried him out there in a shallow grave because he liked nature. We had a really nice old neighbor who used to live by himself. He used to take out the trash for other neighbors just to be nice. Trash days for us are Tuesdays and Fridays. So he took out our trash on Tuesday but didn't do it on Friday. It was odd. Until next Tuesday my neighbor went to check up on him. When he stood by the door there was a really smell of something decomposing. He probably had been dead for almost a week. Poor dude. He died alone but he was a kind neighbor. May he rest in peace. Senior prom. Us guys are all ready to go. We are at one of the girls' house waiting for them to get ready. The girl whose house we were at had just moved into town about 6 months ago. She lives bordering the woods. There was a sport court right on the edge of a steep slope that was covered in thick brush. Us guys were playing tuxedo basketball waiting for the girls. The ball started to go to the edge. I chased after it and threw it back in bounds. While in my tuxedo duds, I lost my balance and fell down the slope into all of the sticker bushes. We were all laughing, but I was in a lot of pain. I tried to heave myself out, and when I did so, I put my hand on a garbage bag. It tore open a bit from the sticker bushes. The most horrendous smell came out of it. Inside the garbage bag was a woman's torso. No legs, no arms, no head. Just a rotting, bug-infested torso. I was more confused than scared. I don't think I realized what was going on until we were all back on the court calling the police. I called the cops and spent the rest of the night watching the investigation and trying to figure out what happened. My parents had to buy the tuxedo from the store. I think it made me a more well-rounded person. Honestly, it makes you look at life differently. A lot of people haven't seen death and don't understand it. This can be an intro to every forensic crime TV show ever. I was driving home from an event. I was 24 at the time, and there was a car stopped on the side of the road and someone was trying to flag me down. I drove past but saw a body on the side of the highway. I thought the people in the other car had hit a deer. Turns out it was a young girl. I think the papers said she was 17 from Montana. Kind of a transient. She was hit by the mirror of a truck and thrown under it. She was pretty mangled. Poor girl lost her dignity in death. Her bra and shirt had pretty much come off and her pants slipped on her hips. I thought someone might have assaulted her on first look, but apparently the forces of impact will do that to a person. It was a hit and run and the guy who flagged me down was first on scene. I was fine after that from seeing her, but the thing that stuck with me the most was a comment made on the city newspaper's website. It justified this hit and run, saying the person probably just thought it was a deer and kept driving. There was no way. I'm pretty sure you are supposed to report a hit deer and not just keep driving. At least that is the way it was in Pennsylvania. In 2009 I was going to uncover my boat at my dock. The dock is pretty long, so I always run down it so it bobs up and down in the water. As I did that I heard this weird sound like a deflating tire. I uncovered my boat and was standing on the back of it looking in the water when a face down bloated dude just floated by. I called the DNR and apparently my running dislodged a guy who fell in the water while drunk and never made it out. Holy crap. Working my first job ever. Cleaning railroad carts, which means I get up at 4 AM, take the subway at 5 AM and start work at 5:30. When I arrive at the subway platform, a guy is sitting on a bench with a needle in his arm. He is not breathing and his eyes are all cloudy. I call 112, our emergency number, and they send police and ambulance. Ask me to wait and try to close the platform so other people won't have to see. I got to work 5 hours late due to that, and my boss told me in no unsure terms that I was never welcome again since I was late. Even telling him about what happened gave me no slack, because it wasn't my job to call it, and my boss got fired around 2 weeks later, and frick that guy. I haven't personally, but when my dad was 15 he lived alone with his dad. And one morning he woke up and asked his dad to take him to school, but his dad didn't move, so he thought he was playing around. But sadly it turned out he had a heart attack. I couldn't imagine how tragic that must have been for him. My dad came home from school one day when he was very young, about 5/6, and climbed into bed with his dad who was having a siesta. His dad hugged him tight and they fell asleep. An hour or so later, my dad woke up to find his mother upset. His dad had taken an overdose. I guess my father cuddling into him have him a small amount of comfort in his last moments. Fricked my dad up a fair bit though. I was 16. The day before I was to start driving school. I was about to go out and hang out with my friends. I wanted to ask my dad what time the next day I had to go to the driving thing. I searched up and down the house but couldn't find him. Truck in the driveway, shoes at the door, dogs in the house. I didn't think much of it, went to grab a sweater from the laundry room. I opened the door, saw my dad hanging from the ceiling, bar stool knocked over. I screamed, "Oh dad, no." Just went into autopilot, called 911. Lady on the phone asked if I check his pulse. I tried, couldn't find one. Still on the phone I ran upstairs, took my sister into my mom's room, told them what happened and kept them from going down to see what I saw. The fire department got there first, then EMS. Then a crap ton of cops. They got him out without my mom and sister having to see him like I did. I called my friend, he sprinted over, came in through the cops and such and gave me a hug. No note, no warning signs at the time. I was in shock for a day or two. Then depressed like the world lost its color, it just went a few shades grayer. Then I was angry for the most part. I'm 25 now. I think I'm doing better than most people who go through something like that. I think it made feel less empathy about people complaining about stuff that doesn't matter. At the same time I think it made me into who I am now. Other than bad memoirs and the odd nightmare, I think it affects me but doesn't define me. Oh man, finally a question I can contribute to. This was only a little over a year ago in Clearwater, FL. I was home on leave and would always go fishing whether it was 2 PM or 2 AM. If I was awake and had nothing to do, I'd drive about 10 minutes down the road to my favorite spot and throw a line in, not expecting to ever catch anything really. I just like to kill time. Well, this one night it was around 11 PM and I let my mom know I was leaving and I'd be back later on. So I get to the beach that I have to walk down to get to the docks I fish from, but decided I'd try my luck wading in the shallow waters instead. I would have never done this, as it's nighttime and the water's cold. I'd been in the water for maybe 30 minutes when I felt something brush up against my leg. I'm not afraid of anything in the ocean, be it seagrass, fish, or even sharks. I didn't think anything about whatever brushed up on my leg until it just didn't leave, just kept steady next to my leg. It's pitch black, so unless the moon was illuminating it, I couldn't see it. Eventually I got curious and pulled out my phone to use the flashlight. What I saw freaked me the frick out. At first I could only see the heels and back of the calves, but as I moved the light I could see it was a man lying face down in the water. I've never ran so fast out of the water in my life. Now being on a beach past closing hours, it closed at sunset, and knowing the police are usually pretty strict about this rule, I debated whether or not to call the cops, but eventually did and told them what was going on. They showed up, got some information they needed from me and told me I could go home. As I was driving home, my mom called me freaking out. She stays up late to watch the news at 1 and saw that they found a body washed up on the beach I go to and she thought it was me. So needless to say she was relieved. This summer I drove up to a fresh motorcycle accident on a highway. A couple of other cars had stopped, and people were getting out to help. As I was considering pulling over also, I saw the rider's gory, mangled body just ahead, squished between the guardrails that divided the highway. The people on foot reached him as I was slowing down within a few feet of the poor deceased. Their body language told me there was unfortunately no reason to stop and offer life-saving help. Not wanting my small kids to see images they might never forget, and seeing as how we were in a canyon where deer were common, I pointed out the windows and told them, "Hey, look over there, a deer." Thankfully, it worked, and we drove past while everyone looked the opposite direction of the body, except me. I gazed hard at the man in those moments. He hadn't been wearing a helmet, that was obvious. His arm had been shredded mostly off, inside parts were on the outside. I imagined the family who would never see this dad, son, brother, husband again. I looked at my own sweet little family. Even though I'm a safe rider with proper gear, I just haven't been able to get back on my own motorcycle since. I was 16 and learning to drive. I was following a black truck when the light turned yellow. I slowed down and he sped up. As the truck sped through the yellow light he hit a car turning left that failed to yield. It then kind of glanced off the car and hit a telephone pole. I had some basic first aid training for CPR etc and my unused first aid kit from school. I pulled over and got out to go see if I could help out. The accident didn't really look too bad. The driver and passenger in the truck came around to the front of their truck and I thought to myself, you shouldn't move after an accident in case you have a neck injury etc. The driver from the car had also gotten out. I'd never seen a car accident and was a bit surprised that they didn't really seem to be fighting each other. Then I got around to the front of the truck. A gentleman was alive and somewhat conscious but pinned by the truck against the post and bleeding a lot. I almost threw up and my little CPR mask was not going to be much help. My mom was in the passenger seat and even with her lack of a one-day CPR course she was a champ. She took her coat off and attempted to apply pressure to what was left of the bottom of this guy and asked me to call 911. I did manage to do that but other people already had so they didn't really talk to me. When the ambulance arrived the first paramedic threw up on seeing the guy but then a second ambulance came and they did their best to get him ready. They backed the car up and he lived to get to the hospital. Unfortunately he died several hours later. The backing of the car up was the most traumatic thing I've ever seen. There was none lodged in the grill and what I recall of his torso was just a mash of meat. My mom had to go into counseling for a while and still can't make hamburgers as she described holding pressure on his body as feeling like hamburger. She hasn't talked to me about it since the day it happened really. I felt depressed for a day and can't look at blood in movies. Like I can't even watch Grey's Anatomy on TV. Other than that it's not really changed my life. Oh geez, that's so awful. And you know it's really bad when the paramedics throw up. I work as a correctional officer and on one particularly busy day, I heard a bunch of inmates just start yelling for help and hitting their intercom buttons all at once in one block. There was only me and one other officer working in the jail and one person has to be in the control room at all times. The other officer was new. The inmates were yelling so much that we couldn't hear what they were saying over the intercom so I had to go in there while the other officer stayed in the control room. I opened the door to the block and immediately the inmates started yelling he hung himself. I ask them who, where, they tell me the cell and I go in. I run in and find an inmate, unbelievably pale, eyes wide open with a blank stare, limply hanging from a hook in his cell. I get him down with the help of the inmates. radio for an ambulance and start CPR. After about 15 minutes, another officer enters and we continue CPR together until EMS arrives. The 15 minutes spent alone with that guy were intense. I was only 25 at the time and he was younger than I was. For the next few days, I found myself randomly crying and having flashbacks of trying to get him down, and his eyes, open, dull, and unblinking after I got him down. I thought I would be fired for sure, but I wasn't. My bosses and co-workers actually praised my performance quite a bit. Anyway, it's been about a year and I don't really care anymore to be honest, but the guy's mom is suing me and going around town saying that I covered up a murder, or possibly murdered him myself. I tried to save him. I still work in corrections and I hate it. It's a frustrating, thankless job. The inmates either hate you or like you too much as a woman. Their families see you as the bad guy locking up innocent people, and the public doesn't even consider that the job even exists. I'm not sure if the dead guy has had any effect on how I feel about my job or not. Who knows? I found my grandmother. Gave me the dubious honor of being able to tell my dad both his parents were dead. I dropped her off at home the night before. Looked like she got caught in her air hose, tripped and fell. Hit her head right after she walked in the house. She told me just before we pulled up to her house that night that she needed to get to the bathroom, and that's where I found her. She still had her coat on. This may sound really lame, but every time I watch a TV show where they find a dead body at the beginning, like CSI, NCIS, and others, the people always scream and freak out. I didn't. It's bugged me ever since. Look, most people don't scream. You become too shocked about it and you don't really feel anything. While in college I dated a girl who lived fairly far out in the middle of nowhere. I was taking her home one night and we saw a truck pulled off to the side of the road. She told me the truck was there earlier that morning and had me pull over. She called the police and we waited until they got there. Someone committed suicide, which was common along that particular stretch of road, nicknamed Suicide Highway. She told it wasn't the first time she's phoned in a suicide either. Not me, but my aunt and uncle and a passerby found a man's remains on a backcountry road early one morning. He had been hit so many times that there was hardly anything left. They thought it was a deer at first. The cops were called, but he didn't have any on him and no one ever claimed the body. They assumed he was a drifter and nothing ever came of it. Was cat sitting for my dad when he was on a business trip. I went there with my mom. Pulled into the driveway. His car was in the garage. I figured he just took the taxi to the airport. Nothing big. I go inside and the house smells terrible. Usually the litter boxes stink, but this was a new low. Opened a window and went to feed the cat and clean the litter box. Mom saw a few dead animals in the house. The cat brought in dead things all the time, and since I'm a total weenie, she cleaned them up. As I was scooping the litter box, my mom was by the door since the smell was really getting to her. It was then she noticed his wallet and phone were on the counter. She realized that he was still home. So I went upstairs to say hi. Went up there and found him collapsed on his bed. He'd apparently died several days ago, but since there was a business trip he was supposed to go on, I didn't think any lack of communication was weird. I screamed, and mom came upstairs and got me away from there and called 911. She knew exactly what to do. Looking back, the signs were there that something was seriously wrong, but it was just easy to explain everything due to being a coincidence. It likely would have been much worse if I went there alone, as I should have, but as for the fallout, there really aren't any terrible lingering memories outside of the random dreams when he's still alive. But that's the case I find for most people who lost loved ones. Sorry for not making the best well-written story. I'm not that good at this. My dad passed away 6 years ago and I often have those dreams where he is still alive. I can't imagine experiencing what you did. I'm so sorry. Growing up, my mom was very agoraphobic and really wouldn't leave the house. She would send my brother and me out to get her cigarettes from a nearby store. Around some time in the early 90s, the store stopped letting me and my brother pick up cigarettes for her, because this was around the time that cigarettes were becoming more regulated, and they were really worried about kids getting a hold of them. She was a chain smoker and basically smoked 2 or 3 packs a day, so this was a huge problem for her. We had a neighbor a couple doors down named Gilbert. He was very poor, didn't seem to have a job and was living on some form of government assistance. He was very lean, didn't talk much, and sort of looked like a lanky version of Yasser Arafat. My mom managed to arrange for us to go to his house, give him a check, and he would go buy her a carton of cigarettes, and he would use part of the check to buy something for himself as well. This went on for several years, until one day we went down to knock on Gilbert's door. Knock knock, no answer. He didn't have a car, so it was really impossible to tell whether he was home or not, but he seldom if ever wasn't home. So, we went home unsuccessful. The next day, again we knocked on his door. Knock knock. Still nothing. At this point I turned the doorknob, sort of thinking I would verify his house was locked, and his door came pushing open. The smell was unbearable. I've never smelled anything like it before, or since. At first, I thought it was just the fact his trailer had maybe 4 feet of trash covering every corner of it. Flies were swarming about, and there were empty beer bottles strewn about randomly. That's when I looked over, to the left, and saw a large bloated body lying on the floor next to a ladder. It was really not identifiable as Gilbert to begin with. It looked totally different from a person, because it had been left so long to decay. My brother, who was older than me and understood what it was, I was maybe 8 at the time, pushed me back out of the doorway, closed the door, and proceeded to push me back on the way home. I kept asking him what it was, and what had happened. It turned out he had been up on the ladder changing a picture frame, and had fallen, hit his head, and pretty much died on the spot. It doesn't really affect me to this day, but I think about it every so often. I think at the time I didn't really understand exactly what it was, or what had happened. It was only later that I had put all of the pieces together, and asked my brother about it. Good big bro getting you out of there quickly. I was like 15 at the time, walking to school. It's maybe 6:30 or 7 AM on trash day and the neighbors have already started taking out the bins. I get to school and I've goddamn forgotten my math notebook, so I run back home to get it. I smell it before I see it. Some dude eviscerates his girlfriend and leaves her for the garbage men in a freaking hefty bag sitting on my neighbor's lawn. It bursts as he tries to lift it. He thought he was standing in Halloween props and strawberry jam at first. The smell of decomposition lingers. Man. Honestly, I think I spent weeks trying to wash it out of my nose. It's been a few years and I can still go to the deli or hunt and fish, but it got harder to distinguish a hock of deer from human. But really though, ignorance was nice. I could have lived fine without seeing that. I lived in a house across from a park in Albuquerque, NM, at about 7 AM. It was cold on a Sunday morning and I thought I'd walk down to the street corner with my dog and get a paper. When I stepped outside onto my front porch, I noticed a shirtless man lying on the dewy grass in the center of the park about 75 yards away. I thought that was weird because who would do that? Suspicious. I walked my dog over there. On closer inspection, he looked very quiet and a little beat up. About 25 years old, dark hair, olive complexion. His face showed signs of trauma that I suspected was due to being pummeled by fists. Swollen eyes, puffy lips. His chest showed dried blood smeared all over, and then I noticed stab wounds in his chest, about a ½ inch wide. Thus the reason for the blood. I reached down and felt his wrist. I didn't need to wait for a pulse. His skin temperature was cold as a stone. I knew no one could be alive who was that cold. This other neighbor walked up from behind me, all quiet, observing. He's dead, I said to him. Said my neighbor. Would you call it in? I asked. I didn't want to talk to the police. I had small kids, and I didn't want cops coming over, interviewing me. I'd rather my children didn't find out about this and become fearful of living across from the park. I could tell the dead man was Hispanic. In the next day's newspaper there was a 1-column story about 2 inches long about him. He had no name. He was obviously part of the gang culture which was prevalent, and it was believed he was dumped there. I'll never forget him, but it doesn't haunt me. Everyone knows that if it were a little girl or boy this would have made front page headlines. What happened to this little boy who grew up to be nobody anybody cared about? People need to call the police. That's exactly the reason why gangs get away with what they do. Not that it would have helped this guy, but people don't call when they should. We were driving up a hill along a very steep gully type forest thing at 2 AM. To the left of me was a cement barricade, then the opposite lane. To the right was a barricade and a steep drop. There were no sidewalks at all on my side of the road. As we was coming around the corner we had to swerve because there was a dead body on the road. She was sprawled out and her belongings of her purse scattered everywhere. She was definitely pushed from a moving vehicle. There was absolutely no way she would have been walking and hit on any section of that road. It really bothered me, but not because of finding her, but I was more bothered about myself not really feeling as emotional about it as I should have, or how society makes you feel like you should in that type of situation. On holiday in Cyprus circa 2004/5. I was about 12 at the time. So here's what happened. I was swimming in the sea, which BTW I had a terrible phobia for a long time afterward. When I felt a brush against my shoulder, I turned round in utter shock to see a man whose face was a sickly greyish blue. I let out a huge scream for help and tried to drag him whilst swimming toward shore. I was only about 15-20 meters out. Another guy comes over and helps me pull him to shore. I am eventually pushed to the back as people gather around him. Some people try first aid or whatever, but it's clear he's a goner. This guy looked to be in his late 20s, early 30s. Eventually the ambulance came and put him in the dreaded black bag. I was felt frozen for the rest of the holiday. The state in which his body was in is something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. The color of him was truly horrifying. Was driving down the road and pulled up to a car crash scene at the same time as the first cop car arrives. Wasn't sure which way the cop wanted us to go, so we drove by the wrecked car very slowly. Noticed someone under the front right wheel of the RAV4. Half of me told myself, don't look, dude's about to be dead as frick. Other half said, well, what if he's alive and needs help? Nope. He was super dead. The bottom half of his body was facing the ground and his torso and above was facing up. He was so messed up that he looked fake, as if he was from The Walking Dead. I remember his open eyes and bloody teeth so clearly. What's pretty crazy was how that incident made my group of friends and me late to the club, because we were tripping out and discussing what we just saw. Well, those couple minutes actually saved us, because as we arrived to the club and started to look for parking, we heard gunshots and saw people running. We noped right out of there and agreed that we should just stay in for the night. Checked the news after and the shooting happened right outside the club we were planning to go to. 2 people got shot. 1 died. This is probably not the kind of story you are looking for, but it tears me up every time, so here you go. I should add that this is not my story but my grandfather's. My grandmother had been in a hospital for quite some time. Cancer. Getting weaker and weaker. My grandfather went to see her every day. One morning he came in her room, quietly put his stuff in a corner of the room and turns towards her to give her a kiss. Then he notices, wait, why are no not breathing? He said she was still warm. It is very possible that she had her last breath just as he came into the room. Of course my grandfather was in tears the whole time he was telling me the story. If any of you has ever seen their grandpa cry, you know what effect it has on you. Especially him that usually jokes around all the time. Anyway, I am now crying in front of my computer. Have a good day people and take care of your loved ones. My mum and I went to visit one of the older men from her church as she had been receiving phone calls about how he hadn't gone recently. Mum said that it was out of the ordinary, so off we went. When we arrived in his driveway, the police pulled up behind our car. The cops started ringing his doorbell and knocking on all the windows of the home. No response. My mum and I stood outside the front of the house waiting. The cops went to the neighbors' houses and began asking questions about the old man. Every one of them said he had been acting strange recently. Eventually the police couldn't do any more and smashed the back door to get into the home. It turned out that the man had committed suicide by hanging himself, and the scariest part is that he had a smile on his face. I don't think it affected me at all, as I didn't get to actually see the body as I didn't want to. Also, I didn't know the man, so I had no emotional attachment. It affected my mother though. We don't talk about it. It puzzles me how he could die with a smile. I dunno. I just thought people who died by hanging all looked the same, and that was nowhere near smiling. I wonder what the science is behind that. Dang it, now I got one more thing to Google. Grew up in South Africa and kept smelling this awful smell when the wind blew in a particular direction. One day my dad was outside and it was particularly strong, so he looked over the back fence into the overgrown scrub and found a dead body. We called the police and they came to remove the body. They didn't ask too many questions and we never found out what had happened. I did the EMT thing for a bit. But I doubt that is what you are asking. I wonder if I did it because of this. I never really thought about it. I guess I was 16 at the time, and I was with this girl who I knew fairly well. A few of us tooled around with some instruments, though I doubt you would call it a band, and we were all pretty good friends, often with benefits. This is a Saturday afternoon, and we had hit the gym together. Fairly standard foreplay at the time, and we were headed back to her place. We swung by the grocery store, because her folks had asked her to shop for dinner. We get back to her place, and it's 2:15 in the afternoon on a remarkably pleasant day in Texas in June. We had the top down on her ride, even. We get out of the car, and I grab the 2 paper bags of groceries, the one in my left arm much heavier than the one in my right. She opens the screen door and pushes open the wooden front door for me. I slip past her into the kitchen and set the bags on the counter as she walks into the kitchen behind me. When I turned to her, and she started to kiss me, I smelled it. My sense of smell has always been extremely acute. Hot water. Something else I couldn't describe. I knew it was wrong, and I told her to hang on while I hit the bathroom. I went into the bathroom down the hall that she shared with her slightly older brother to find Steve has slashed his wrists in the bathtub. Yep, I would say it sticks with me. Oh crap, that's really sad. Poor girl. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.